Hello. Hello, and welcome to the Revenue Marketing Bootcamp, where we will be hearing epic strategies from 4 leaders. My name is Andrus Purde. I am a co-founder of Outfunnel, and I'm your host or MC for this online bootcamp. It's great to see you here. How are you? Anyone? Of course. I can't hear you, but I can see your comments already. Thank you for all the highs in the chat. So yeah, please feel free to participate. And let's test the participation bit out right away. So please use the chat bit in Livestorm to enter the city and country you're listening to this from. Let's see how global is this thing. And by the way, during the sessions, you can also post your questions in the Livestorm, but please use the questions tab for that instead. Your first session will start in 2 minutes, and it will be epic. But before that, let me quickly introduce you today's agenda. So we're going to kick off in 2 minutes. The first speaker is Robin Daniels, CMO of Matterport, who will tell you about Epic Marketing 101. Right after that, so depending on your time zone, but in 45 minutes, thereabouts, we'll hear John Miller of Demandbase, and he will give us the complete guide to account-based experience. We'll take a quick 3-5 minute break, and then in about 1.5 hours, we'll be hearing Carrie Shaw of Copper and Catherine Liebert of Outfunnel, who will talk about aligning sales and marketing for revenue growth. And then we'll be done in about 2.5 hours. And I'll be introducing each speaker before each session in a bit more detail. Let's see where we're from. We're from Barcelona, Spain, Tampa, Florida, Germany, Austin, Texas, Rome, Italy, Helsinki, Iceland. A truly global online revenue marketing bootcamp. It's great to see so many of you here. All right, there's still people joining, but I think we can start. So I'd like to begin with a questionable marketing joke. Ready? Why did the marketing couple break up? Because lack of engagement. I hear no laughter, and I'm saying to myself, this is because of the way this webinar tool works. And I promised you that the rest of this 2.5 hours will be much better. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to your first speaker. Robin Daniels is CMO of Matterport. Matterport is a leader in 3D spatial data and cameras. And before Matterport, Robin held many executive leadership roles in companies like WeWork, Salesforce, LinkedIn, Box, and Vera. So without further ado, I'd like to give this virtual proverbial floor to you, Robin.
There you go. That's awesome. I love how you start with a joke. That's the way to go. That's for sure. It's not always easiest to engage with an online audience, but I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for hosting me, Andrus, and thank you everyone who showed up today. I wore my special shirt just for the session because epic marketing is something that I care a lot about, and I want to talk about that today with all of you. And I hope you engage in the chat. I hope you ask good questions, and of course, I hope you connect with me after the event as well. You know, I love to stay engaged as much as I can. I've been in marketing for a long time, and today I really want to talk a little bit about my journey and how I got to where I am today. Then I want to share my framework for how I think about epic marketing, just to give you some pointers. And then I want to share some lessons learned in hypergrowth from the last couple of years that I've spent in Silicon Valley. So let me get straight into it. Let me share my screen, and hopefully you can see all this. So let me do this. You know, it's always interesting to do this in an online session. Screen share, and here we go. Let's see if we can get this going. All right, and Andrus, please chime in if something is not showing up well, but hopefully you can see my screen because I can't see anything except my presentation at this point in time. So as Andrus said, I am the CMO of Matterport. And for those of you who don't know who Matterport is, we are the leader in spatial data, in 3D capture and photography. We actually just went public on NASDAQ back in July in the US, which is a huge milestone for the company, something that we worked really hard to get the company to that point in time to go public. And of course, it's also just a huge milestone in my career. As I like to say, I've had 2.5 IPOs. First with Box, but I wasn't the CMO at that point in time. I reported into the CMO. Then I worked at WeWork, which was about close to an IPO, but didn't quite get there. And now, of course, working at Matterport, we got another shot at it, and it was a really fun event, but also crazy because let's just be honest, the last year and a half has not been an easy time in the world to navigate leadership, go-to-market, the moods and sentiments of your buyers and audiences and all those things. So the fact that we got here is something that I'm immensely proud of, and I want to tell you a little bit about that journey as well. So let me just go straight into it. I am originally from Copenhagen, Denmark. I lived there when I was a little kid. I was born and raised in Copenhagen and went to school there. But I always had a dream of moving to Silicon Valley. I was always into technology. I always loved how technology could impact the world for the better. And I wanted to be part of that revolution. So after working in a dead-end job for a little bit, I decided this was definitely not for me. So I quit my job. I was 21 at the time. I bought a one-way ticket to California. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a place to stay. I'd never been to California before, but I always had this driving thought that I didn't want to look back on my life when I was older, like 50, 60, 70 years old, and say to myself, I was too scared to have taken that chance because there were so many amazing things happening in Silicon Valley at that point in time. So on February 1st, 2000, I moved over to California, and it was great. Everybody was hiring. I just applied to every job that I could get, and that would even talk to me. I just thought, I'm just going to network my way to success and see if I can get a job that way. And in the first 2 or 3 weeks or so, I probably spoke to close to 15 companies. Again, anybody who wanted to chat with me, I just tried to get in there. And after those first couple of weeks, I got 2 job offers, and I ended up taking a job at a small startup in Silicon Valley in a little city called Los Gatos. But the month after I got to California, the whole market crashed. The dot-com bubble burst, so to speak. And it was brutal. Companies were shutting down. People were getting laid off. I don't know what the hell happened. I'm like, what was going to happen with this magical adventure that I wanted to go on? The company I was at did not make it. I ended up moving to a different company. That did not make it either. And I ended up at a big company in 2001 that actually, despite the tough time of what was happening in the dot-com era with the implosion, that company was doing well. And that's when I really kind of got my start in my career, a company called Veritas. For those of you who don't know it, big public company. It was growing steadily throughout that time, even during the dark times of the dot-com implosion. But since then, just to get a long story short, I've moved around in my career, and I've had some companies that you've probably never heard of that ended up not going anywhere. But I also had some decent companies that have, of course, made a mark in the world. Salesforce, I would say, is when I really started. My career started taking off. This was I joined in 2007, and I led a product called Chatter at that point in time, which is kind of like an early version of Slack, which is how could we get team members to communicate and collaborate better throughout a company by breaking down the silos and barriers to that communication. Then I moved on from Salesforce to Box, came in there, moved the company through hypergrowth from about 200 people to just over 1,000 people to an IPO, and that was an amazing rise. And then I thought I'm going to go really small, so I joined Veras as CMO, and that company was like 8 people when I joined. I was the first marketing hire. It's fun joining a company where you had to build everything from scratch. I was even in there putting together IKEA furniture, but also the company was in stealth mode, so I really wanted to take a company from really early inception to all the way to being, a live company in the market, raising funding, building a team, all that, and that was fun. After that, I went to LinkedIn. I was there for a few years, and then I was actually gonna stay at LinkedIn for quite a while because I love the company, I love the platform. Many of you who connected with me, that I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I think it's such a positive place that we can all share and engage with each other. But WeWork came along, and it was just a company in amazing growth. I love the story because I always felt like WeWork was a physical manifestation of what LinkedIn could be, a place where people can come together and do the best work of their lives, really bringing community to the forefront. Of course, WeWork was an incredible ride, but it didn't end up materializing in the way that we thought because of a lot of reasons, which then, of course, led me to where I am today, which is at Matterport. And the reason I ended up at Matterport is because of these 3 reasons. And it's a theme you'll see throughout the presentation as well. I have to believe in a purpose. And I think we as people do much better work when there's a deep purpose that we believe in. Don't get me wrong, there will always be days that suck and days that are great. But fundamentally, if you believe in the purpose of what you're trying to do and what the company is trying to do, you will go the extra mile. So purpose really matters. And we, of course, see that in engagement, not just internally, but also when we start sharing that purpose with our customers externally. Community is a big part of it. Like, is there a strong community around the company, or can there be? Because as you'll see, as I talk later in my presentation, I think one of the super powers of strong brands is the building of community, of a strong, vibrant, healthy community that is willing to be your loudest champions. You know, the word of mouth and sharing with each other organically without you having to constantly try to push them to do so. And then finally, of course, we live in the age where impact really matters. You know, I wanted to work at a company that is all about what are we doing in the world that has a massive impact. And for Matterport, if we digitize every space, we bring people closer to those spaces, we can lower carbon emissions, we can, of course, save companies tons of money because you don't have to send teams around there, and you can have a great experience. You can go visit the Louvre from wherever you are and have that magical experience. If you can go visit the Forbidden City in Beijing because of Matterport, that's a beautiful thing. So the impact that we can have in the world is really, really profound. So that's why I chose to go to Matterport, but I also share a lot online. So if you ever connect with me, if you're not connected with me, please connect, because I share a lot about my thoughts on leadership, go-to-market, how to succeed, how to learn from failure, and all those kinds of things. So anyway, that's a little bit about me, just a little bit about my journey. Let me talk a little bit about how to think about growth. You know, I've been in the Valley for over 2 decades, and I finally moved back to Denmark. And so I've learned a couple of lessons, and I wanted to share them with you here. So number one, it's really important nowadays to get very clear on your purpose. I can't stress this enough. You know, buyers are getting more sophisticated, and you might think, well, we're having an e-commerce engine, or we're selling a chatbot, or we're doing this and that. You know, the need to share your purpose is going to be all important in the future for how buyers actually engage with you and your company, because you can't hide behind the veil anymore of just trying to sell a product just for profit. It actually has to do something good in the world, and more companies, customers, buyers will want to align with companies who have a strong purpose and a strong North Star, which means for you, getting really clear internally first with what your purpose is, and then codifying that through the values that you want to live by. You know, I think, a company that I worked at that did this really well was LinkedIn. We were very clear on our values, what we would do and what we wouldn't do, and what we would accept and not accept, and how we interacted with each other and our customers. Because from those values come all your actions. And those actions, of course, should be dictated by the values that you have. So it's so important, because nowadays, we live in a world where everyone watches, monitors what you do. Yes, your customers do, but your employees also do. And if you want to get the best out of your employees, being very transparent, being very open about this is all important. The other thing that I've learned in my career is that in order to win any market, you have to be able to, as a company, say about yourself, you have to be the first or the best or the only one to do something. Each one of those is a competitive moat. And of course, saying you're first to do something, and a lot of you probably are because you're startups and you're trying out new things, is a really powerful thing. And you will appeal to a certain audience of trailblazers, pioneers who want to be the first at something. Saying you're the only one to do something will appeal to a slightly different audience of people who think that they can't get whatever you're offering anywhere else. So there's an exclusivity there that's really powerful as well. But I wouldn't use it too much because it doesn't last that long. And then, of course, saying your best, well, guess what? You can't really say your best yourself because it's not credible. You have to get your customers, the press, your influencers, the analysts, whatever it is, other people to talk about how great you are. Saying it yourself, I think you lose a lot of credibility. But each one of them is a competitive mode. And so when I go out and I talk to startups, I always say, well, what is your competitive mode? Are you first? Are you best? Are you the only one to do something? And if you can't articulate it internally, it's very hard to articulate it to your customer. There's nothing wrong with saying on your website, we're the first company to do X, Y, Z, or we're the best one based on customer reviews for chat services or a podcast platform or whatever it is that you do. Each one is a competitive moat that you should absolutely use as a strength. Now, when you think about some examples, of course, of bigger companies that we can all relate to, I think of Google and Apple are very different. Apple is never first with anything, never, but they're always best. When they release something, they're always the best. It's integrated, it's thoughtful, it's well thought out, it just works. But the secret also of how they do it, and of course it's kind of a ninja move because they're well known and they're big. They're never first, they're always best, but they always talk about themselves like they're first. When they go up and talk about one of their products, they always say it's the most magical, groundbreaking first thing you'll ever see, even though many other companies have done it before, maybe not as successfully, maybe not as thought through, but they're never first, but they're always best. And Google is oftentimes the exact opposite. They have a culture of trailblazing, trying new things. A lot of it doesn't work out. Google Glass, Google Wave, you name it. But at least they're out there trying. They're trying to be first, and they learn from it, and then they move on and so on. But each of them works, and you just think about that as you think about your positioning and your messaging in the market, because customers want to buy into first, best, or only. The other thing that's really important is these three things in terms of, if you want to create a super brand that stands the test of time, you obviously have to have a product that people love. Everyone will go, yeah, of course. If your product is not good and it sucks, nobody's ever going to buy it, and you're never going to have a strong brand. So a product is important. I think all of you get that. The community is also an incredible superpower. If I think about some of the brands that are out there in the world who have kind of turned the corner and become part of the vernacular of how we engage and talk about strong brands and strong go-to-market, community is a superpower. I think of a company like Airbnb. Has a great product, of course, but they also have an incredible community that differentiates them from any other company. You could get many of the same, let's say, properties on Booking.com or other sites, but you go to Airbnb because you're part of that community. They've told a bigger brand story. I think Peloton is another great example of that. If you want a good workout, honestly, you can go to YouTube and there's a gazillion workouts that you can do for free. There's biking, there's running, there's high intensity classes. The reason why Peloton is such a superpower and a brand is because they've cultivated a strong community. It's not the product in my mind that's super differentiated, it's the community. So community is really important. Nurturing that over time, giving people a reason to be a part of it is really, really important. And then finally, of course, when you have that, the love and then sharing that with everyone also becomes really key. I would say that there are three parts of building a strong brand. You have to, of course, make people aware that you exist. It's obvious. Then you have to make people understand what you do, harder to do. And then you have to make people love you. And it's the last one that's really hard. And you do that by consistency of your purpose, your values, your actions, the way you show up to your community. It's the way Salesforce has done it for a long time. It's the way many of these super brands do it. And you think about some of these brands that are out there, let's just pick on someone, Uber, I think they've turned a corner, but for the longest time, people, they were aware of who they were, they understood the product, but they didn't really love them. They had a big changeover, now they have a new CEO and he's trying to turn the corner of really making people love that brand. But love is a hard thing to get people to do. It takes time and consistency and focus. So you can't just leave it like, if we show up well, people will end up loving us. You have to put the effort in and you have to give it time because again, it takes time to do that. Okay, let me switch gears a little bit to just talk about the framework for epic marketing that I think about oftentimes when I go in, I coach companies or when I come into a new company, like how do I orient the team on what it is that we have to do? And there's basically a formula that I've used for, I would say the last decade plus of my career to orient the team on the work that we have to do in order to go make a difference in the market. And it really looks like this. I think there are three levels that most companies, most teams operate at. Doesn't matter if we're talking marketing. I know this is a marketing chat today, but it could as well be the whole company purpose. It could be your product team, could be your sales team and so on. But I think there are three levels of which you execute at. There's the tactical level, when you're going in and doing things that are like the bare minimum. You're updating your blog post, you're putting out new press releases, you're updating the web pages and so on. You're tweaking, customizing your messaging on your digital and so on, just constantly based on the learnings you have. Good, important tactical stuff. But if you just spend your time in that realm, you're never going to create a breakout company. It just never happens. I've never seen it in my life. If you want to create a breakout company, you have to go more into the strategic realm. Strategic to me is when you have a big idea that can be really move the needle for the company. We're going to put together a program that's going to 2x, 3x, 4x, maybe our lead flow or our awareness, or maybe our sales and so on, but it's going to take effort. strategic projects are rarely done in isolation and rarely done alone. They're usually a team effort and oftentimes a cross-functional effort. Requires oftentimes weeks, sometimes even months to pull these off because they're bigger things. Changing our go-to-market, changing our messaging, getting the whole company and team on board. Big strategic things, but if you do it successfully, those are the things that can really move the needle. And then there's the last category of operation, which I think of as the epic level. As you can see here from my t-shirt, is that when I think you operate at such a level and with such bravery and courage, where you go out and create outsized and exponential momentum and growth for your company. But these are, of course, also the hardest ones to do, because if they were easy, everybody would do it. And the reason why they're hard is because when you operate just at the tactical level, we have endless amounts of data to guide our actions, so it feels comfortable. You have so much data that tells us if we do X, Y, Z, we can improve 10%, 20%, 30%, so on. Super important. You have to do some of those things. But guess what? If you have the data, which is oftentimes, just historical, maybe there's some forward-looking insights in there, but a lot of times it's historical data, so you're trying to base some guesses based on that. And data is not usually something that is just for you. I mean, other companies will probably have similar insights in here. So it's not rarely a competitive advantage if you just rely on that too, but it feels comfortable. When you get to the strategic realm and you start operating there and you have some bigger initiatives, a lot of times you have a thesis, you want to go for it, you have some data for sure, but you also have some unknowns and you're trying to figure out like what's the most intelligent way to go about this? How do we make up for the unknowns with the right strategy, the right teamwork, the right skills, and so on? Super important. But when it comes to the epic level, there's very little data to guide you, if any, and which is why it feels so uncomfortable, because it means that you're basically trying to take a chance on something that is completely uncomfortable for most companies, which is why they end up getting stuck in the tactical and strategic realm. So I oftentimes tell my team, if we want to create outsized growth, outsized momentum, we have to focus some of our time, some of our attention on the epic things, because guess what? They never happen on their own. If you think that they'll just magically happen, some epic idea, it rarely does, because we get so busy on the tactical stuff, updating the web pages, here's some copy, and so on. Or we get really stuck in the strategic realm. Rarely, unless you give it air and time to find time and space for the epic things. And so what I tell my team is, when we think about how we spend our time and how we break down, our efforts and everything else, I would do it this way, roughly. We'll spend 20% of our time on tactical things, 60% of our time on strategic things. Again, these are important things where we have a lot of data, but there's unknowns, but we can make big impact. But we also have to create breakout moments. If we want to create a category leader, if we want to create outsized momentum, 10x growth, you have to really take some chances on big things. And sometimes it might not work out, but it's also the moments when you look back in your career and say to yourself, wow, we did something that was really special. And we pull together as a team. These epic efforts requires bravery, courage, and they require team effort. Again, an epic thing never happens alone. I've never seen it. It's always a team effort. You have to go convince people, because a lot of times people will tell you it's crazy, it's stupid, nobody's ever done it before, you shouldn't do it. I always told this to my team at WeWork, because we were going through some creative cycles, and I said, come present ideas to me. And unless it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, it's probably not good enough, because I wanted to be in that epic realm. And so that's a barometer I use. Like, is it pushing the boundaries where I'm like, oh, can we even do this? Should we do this? And of course, with the lens of it has to be positive, it has to give back, it has to be impactful. But is it, if I even have some of those questions, probably means there's a thread there to start pulling on. And then you have to go massage it, work it, figure out if there's really something there. And of course, the key here, if you think about this framework, you might go to yourself, well, you can't just spend all your time, in the thinking about stuff and the big things. You also have to do, which is absolutely right. Once you figure out the strategic idea or your epic idea, of course, then you have to break it down into tactical things that you can go and execute on. Super important. But you have to give yourself space to these things. And so how do you define epic? It's a question I get a lot, and it's a hard one to define. I define it in one of two ways. I always say, you either find something that's completely broken, it's so shit, and you say, this is awful, we can do this 10 times better. And there's a lot of companies out there that have created amazing momentum because they found something that was so broken and they've done it 10 times. I think Airbnb is a great example of that. It's not like you couldn't rent a private home or an apartment or a house before. It was just really hard. It was a shitty experience. You couldn't really tell Was this a good place? How was the host? What are the reviews? It was very like opaque, and it wasn't joyful in any way. And they came in and said, we can do this much better. We can do it in a way that benefits the hosts, the customers, and of course us as a company. An incredible idea. So they found something that was broken and they 10x it. Amazing. Or I think you can also do something brand new, something that's never been done before, that nobody has ever seen. I think of Uber as another example of this category. You couldn't have done what Uber had done, and built that kind of company. Same with Lyft. Before the advent of geolocation, mobile phones, and I was figuring out how to like marry that up with ride sharing and everything else. They found something that really had never been done before. They scaled it and executed in a way that made it just completely frictionless for everyone. But that was hard to do. And of course, then they put the marketing back into it and so on. So my point with this framework is, I of course use it for my marketing team. Like what are we doing? How do we break down the projects? But you can also use it for anything else. You can use it for your go-to-market. You can use it for sales, for partnerships, for product development, you name it. But that framework has really served me very well. But it's risky, and I'm not going to lie and say that everything you're going to do in that realm is going to work out, because sometimes you take chances on something and it doesn't work out for whatever reason. For example, if you'd built a certain company the last couple of years and then suddenly get hit with a black swan event like COVID, that could have derailed you, regardless of how great your idea or execution is. So there will always be unknowns, but that's part of the fun, of course, entrepreneurship and also in marketing is let's do something that has an impact and that really moves the ball forward, because it's really rewarding to do so. When I think back on my career, and we've done some things that were really great, and then we did some things that were like, well, we tried, doing a Super Bowl ad at Salesforce with the Black Eyed Peas. It's the first time I think any company had ever done like a consumer-like ad for an enterprise product at the Super Bowl in 2011. Didn't really work, but it was kind of fun to work on, and I'm glad I had the experience. But so some of these moments, you lean into them and you just embrace them for all they are, and you can always learn from them as much. As I often say, you learn probably more from failure than you do from all your successes. So embrace it all. It's definitely worth it. So let me move on just for time as well, because I know there's other speakers coming as well. So let me share some lessons learned from hypergrowth, and I'll go through this fairly quickly. I want to share some of the things that we did at various companies I've worked at. So one idea is embrace the crazy ideas out there. When somebody has a nugget of an idea, and you go and you think to yourself, it's a little uncomfortable. Can we do it? Should we do it? What will it mean? There's probably something there and you need to like investigate a little bit more. So for example, at Box, this is way back when, you could sign up for Dropbox or Box and you could get 2 gigabytes of storage. And then you could get more if you invited your friends and so on. And I think we've all been there. We had this crazy idea. Let's invite people in to Box and give them 50 gigabytes for free. It's not this like a little bit more. It's not like we doubled the storage to 4 gigabytes. We like, let's go all in to make it so compelling that we'll have a lot of people sign up. When it was first suggested and we were looking into it and people were like, can we do this? Will our server scale? What if we have too many people sign up? Will it crash? What if we have nobody sign up? Will it make us look like fools? There was a lot of uncomfortable questions that went with this, but we decided to do it and we went all in. Took months of like preparation on the marketing side because we wanted to work with handset developers, mobile developers. We wanted to have a direct marketing campaign. We wanted to, of course, make sure our service could scale. But we finally launched it, again, epic team effort. And in the first week of doing this, we had over 1 million signups because it was such an outsized, I think, offer and campaign that was so unusual and unexpected that it really worked. But it was a crazy idea and it was uncomfortable to do so. But these are the moments that you lean into, of course. And we were a small company. We didn't have a lot of funding. So it was like just hustling our way to getting this out there and making it compelling for people. The other thing I learned a lot, and I've seen this time and again in companies that are in the tech space, Silicon Valley, other places in the world, is this notion like we say something to the world and then everyone's heard it and we move on. We got an article in TechCrunch and everyone's heard it, or we got an article in VentureBeat or New York Times mentioned us and we're done, we can move on. It just doesn't work that way. You have to relaunch things over and over and over and over again. So when I ran Chatter at Salesforce, we came up with this relaunch cadence of launch, repeat, over an 18-month period of time. Every 6 weeks, we said we want to have news in the market. And the news, of course, has to be squarely focused on Chatter, but it has to also be slightly differentiated in what the story is, because if it's the same story, yeah, you're not going to get the same pickup. You're not going to get media to care. You're not going to get customers to pay as much attention. So that's to be a slightly different angle. So we came up with this cadence of how we're actually going to talk about it to the world. And by the end of this 18 months, it was the most successful product launch we had at the time for Salesforce. More adoption than ever, and it got more press coverage than any other launch that we'd ever done. But it was a lot of work to get there. Launching something new every 6 weeks required a Herculean team effort. It was a lot of late nights, but it also paid off in the end. And we just came in and said, here's the roadmap for what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to announce. Here's when we're going to announce it. And we're just going to keep pushing forward. And over time, we started really seeing that momentum pay off. Clarity is key. As you think about growth, hyper-growth, going after the epic projects, having clarity is really key. This is something that the WeWork founders created early on. I think it was in 2009 when they were first having the idea of WeWork, what it could be. They had a clear vision of, they wanted to create a company that was really focused on the human being and all the things that a human being has to deal with throughout their day and their life, whether that's office space, home living, shopping, all kinds of things. They had that clarity about that vision, and that became a key part of actually sharing that with the world. Because if you think back, I know nowadays many people just think of WeWork as an office space company. It was much more than that. It was a community that people wanted to be a part of because you felt like you were part of something else. And part of that key was sharing the story of that WeWork was much bigger part of the ecosystem of your life. It was not just an office space company, it was a lifestyle company, really. So the clarity of having that early on, so you can then align your employees, your marketing efforts, everything towards that is super, super important. But it also means that when you're in the early days and you're taking these chances on the tactical things, the strategic things, the epic things, speed matters a lot. It's one of the things I've learned from all the companies I've worked at. When you're thinking about some of these projects, once you get a little bit of momentum, you got to execute fast. Time kills all deals, as they say in sales, and it's true in marketing too. If something takes too long, it just kind of fizzles out. It's going to get hard to get internal alignment. It's going to get hard to get people excited. It's going to get hard to get your customers excited. Speed matters more than perfection. Now, I say this for startups, probably mid-sized companies too. Once you get to have a super brand and you become a little bit more protectionist of your brand, then perfection matters a lot, because everyone is watching you. If Apple goes and screws up, if Google screws up, they have billions of people watching them. So of course, they can't just operate at light speed. They have to operate a little bit differently. But in the early days, take advantage of that. If you're a seed stage company, pre-IPO, whatever you are, speed matters an awful lot. The other thing about this vision, and it's a key also lesson, of course, for those who followed the WeWork saga for the last couple of years, is yes, clarity is key, and having a vision that people can align behind, both internally and your customers, is super important. But focus is also important. If you try too quickly to be too many things to too many people, your employees are going to get confused. They're not really sure what messaging to put out there in the market, and your customers are going to get confused. And I think one of the lessons I learned from WeWork is, as we were starting to branch out into other things, which is the right thing to do long-term, but short-term, we should have stayed focused just on the office space category because it was so massive. There was so much to win there. Instead of trying to go after living, I think, or schools or surfing companies and all kinds of things that were kind of like tangential, stay focused until you have stability in the core. Once you have stability in the core of your product and your go-to-market, then you can start branching out into other things. But until you have that, and it'll probably take you 5, 10, maybe 15, 20 years to get there, then you start branching out. So keeping focused on having a long-term vision is key, but also keeping focused is equally key. Finally, this has been a hard year for being social and being in person. I won't lie, it's been super challenging for me as well, probably for many of you, not being able to see people. I've never been in the same room with my team in a year and a half since joining Matterport. So proud of what we've done, taking the company public, leading through a pandemic, but it's been hard. Humans are social. And I always saw this with my previous companies. I haven't done it at Matterport because we have been in a global pandemic, but the best, most loyal customers, the best leads, the biggest deals always came from our live events, the dinners, the events that we put on, because those people who show up, they get to hear your story in much more detail. They get to buy into your vision. They get to feel your passion. So when I think about how you spend, how you get leads, for example, into a company, a lot of times you can go to spend them a lot on digital, but a lot of the times the leads or the contacts you're getting are kind of crap. you can do a lot of, or try to build momentum organically through press and through, PR efforts and thought leadership. Great. That's much better when people self-select to come and talk to you because they want to. But the best I've seen always are from our events. I saw it at Dreamforce with Salesforce. I saw it at Boxworks with Box, LinkedIn Talent Connect, WeWork. We did a lot of events because people, when they come there and they hear your story, they can buy into it. The deals were always bigger, the leads were much better, and they became long-time evangelists, which would then, of course, spread, because it's part of my earlier sentiment. Community building is so key, and real live events are absolutely key to doing that. So when you think about your marketing mix going forward, absolutely build it. And I know there's a lot of innovation happening in virtual events. We're doing one today. Great, lean into that as well. But when people can hear a little bit more than just see a tagline from you, it's a great thing because they can really buy into your vision and your story. Okay, let me share some quick things that never work, just to wrap these things up. One things I've also learned, surrounding yourself with great people is the most important thing. Surrounding yourself with assholes never work. And so when you have those people in your company, in your team, you got to either have the conversation right away or you got to move on it pretty quickly, because it's very detrimental, of course, to your culture, but also it ends up coming through in how you deal with your customers, how you think about marketing. So it's super important that you root out those issues really early on. If you have one bad apple, it can spoil everything. I can't stress it enough. I've seen so oftentimes where you have good momentum, good ideas, but there's somebody who is not either doing the right thing because they don't believe in it, or they're just being obstructionist. You got to move on that really quickly. The second thing is, again, that comes back to my earlier point, just using data. If you want to stay incremental, data is great, and you have to do that. It's part of the job. I do it myself. I couldn't do my job without a lot of data. But if you just rely on data, it's very hard to create breakout momentum for you or your company. So at some point, you have to have the courage, you have to have the bravery to lean in and do something that makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable. So definitely embrace that. And then finally, what I call loud silence. Communication is key in everything you do. You think, oh, it's obvious. We communicate a lot internally, not just talking about internally. I always say this: in the absence of information, people make up their own stories. So if your customers don't hear from you, your prospects don't know what's going on, your employees don't hear what's happening, people will make up their own story. So you have to figure out the cadence of communications. It's so important. And it's difficult. If you communicate too much, it might become noise. That's usually the sentiment. It's too noisy. If you don't communicate enough, then people will forget you. Finding the right balance, you have to figure that out yourself, but it's something I've constantly been tweaking in my career as well. It's super valuable for internal alignment when you're working on big, epic, or strategic projects. Internal alignment, communication, absolutely key. But the same goes, and people forget this, for also how you communicate with your customers, how you show up for your community. If your community is not hearing from you, they're hearing from somebody else. So loud silence is not the key either. So final advice is, hire the right people, get out of their way. When you hire athletes, superstars, micromanaging them to death makes no sense at all. Hire great people, get out of their way, take a chance on aptitude and what people are showing, and then you won't regret it. I've rarely regretted when I've seen the hunger in people. I oftentimes say, if you're hiring somebody, hire people who are hungry for it, who are passionate for it, who can go the distance, versus hiring people who feel entitled. So hire the right people is something that you just get better at with time, but it's so key, and get out of their way. And then, of course, once everything is said and done, you have to GSD. It's so important. Once you have your tactical things, your strategic things, your epic things, once you figure out your strategy, you got to actually just get it done. And you have to make sure that people know exactly what to do and you're all going in the same direction. GSDing, nothing can substitute for that, because at the end of the day, if you don't do anything, it's never going to matter. So with that said, that's my final piece of advice. Hopefully, there were some key takeaways here. It's always a little weird, I think, to speak into nothing, but hopefully you're still with me. I hope you go out there and you take some epic chances, and you do something epic for yourself, your company, and your life. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And we have a few minutes. We have 4 minutes for questions.
All right.
I want to ask, so of the campaigns you run, which are your favorite examples of the epic things you've done?
I think, the box one was really fun, I got to say. That was one that was so hard to do, and we had so much fun because we were a small company. So we did like these dorky social videos. We did a lot of email. We tried to work a lot with our partners, but getting all the stars lined up was probably one of the key moments of my life, I would say. And that was key. I think, in Matterport, we launched Matterport for iPhone. So for those who don't know Matterport, it's a 3D capture of a space. At some point, somebody has to capture that space. So we've been selling a camera as well, a 3D camera, but we're really a software platform. Last year during the pandemic, we decided to launch Matterport for iPhone, which was a game changer. And in the first week of us launching Matterport for iPhone, we had more signups in the first week than we did in the first 8 years of being in business. And what we did was we went all in on the message of how you could use this in your personal life, how you could use Matterport to share the space you were inhabiting. This was right as the pandemic was hitting. So everyone was stuck at home. Everyone was, like eager to see each other. And we said, well, if we can come out with a strong message of how you can now use Matterport for personal reasons to share the space you inhabit, the house you would live in, whatever it is, that becomes a way of connecting humanity. So we didn't go out and say, this is great for you to sell or rent out your space. We tried to have a more human message behind it. And it worked wonders. We saw more subscribers, more people sign up than we did in the first 8 years in the first week.
Excellent. Thank you. Then favorite question from the audience is, which of these companies you mentioned had the strongest culture for hypergrowth?
That's a great question. I mean, the CEOs I work for are so different. Benioff is a phenomenal CEO. I would say Aaron Levy was probably one of the most memorable CEOs I've worked for. He was young, inexperienced, and I think there's a lot of value in that. He dropped out of college to start Fox, and he had just endless energy. And every meeting he would say, "Well, how do we 10x it?" And so it just became part of the culture. Every meeting, even when he wasn't there, we would go, "Well, how do we 10x this?" Every idea, every part, every meeting would be like, we're thinking too small. And I think he really bred a culture of excellence and thinking big. But I mean, Adam Newman did the same. I mean, for all of Adam Newman's craziness as we were, he also would come into meetings like, if we would say that this project's going to take 3 months, he'd be like, let's do it in a week. He's like, this is what WeWork can do. We can mobilize, we can move things fast and so on. So he also had a way of just pushing and pushing and pushing. So I feel like I've been fortunate in working some pretty strong cultures. But they've all been very different. And the culture we have in Matterport, we also have a CEO who came from Apple, Google, eBay, super strong leader. He knows how to drive a team to growth and think much bigger than they usually do.
All right. And then the last question. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go to all the questions, but last question and a 25-second answer, please. Where do you find inspiration to do epic marketing?
I rarely find it in books, and I rarely find it when I'm sitting in front of my computer. It's usually when I go for a walk, I go with friends, or I go for a run, or do something that is bringing me out of my normal environment. That's usually why I find inspiration.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. And then, we'll move on with the bootcamp.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone. Again, looking forward to connecting offline. Take care.
Yeah, I recommend following Robin on LinkedIn. His posts are really insightful.